Alright, I try not to get too worked up over this, but it is extremely unsatisfying to see the abrupt corruption in our government. So the US's investigation into their mistaken airstrike on Deir, killing over 80 Syrian servicemen, was released today. And you know what their conclusion was? US says the mistaken coalition airstrikes in Syria were legal. Now, if you want to call that bullshit line that it was an accident, that's one thing. But stepping it up even one more outrageous notch and trying to force it on us that this is legal is not gonna happen. No, we're not idiots. We have a brain. Now, before I get to picking this apart, I'm gonna read the statement and try to give it a fair shake, okay? Washington AP. The U.S. military on Tuesday blamed human error for what it called a mistaken coalition air assault on September 17th that reportedly killed dozens of Syrian soldiers. Okay, there's your first mistake. First, saying it was a mistake is unacceptable. So let me explain to you why it wasn't a mistake. So we all know that the US has the most advanced surveillance system in the world that we know about. And I'll show a clip explaining that in just 1 second. But first, saying it was a mistake when? Okay, this is the map on that day. This city has been encircled by ISIS, the black area here, which is the majority of the city and surrounding area is controlled by the Syrian Arab Army. That has been under the Syrian Arab Army's control since 2012. It's not like this was a fluid battle line that was moving back and forth. In fact, if you go back, you can see there was no action. 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 But, boom, all of a sudden on the 17th, we have all kinds of action. And again, over this 4-year period, you're telling me that there was not enough intelligence collected by the United States surveillance systems, UAVs, Argus systems that I'm going to play a clip of in a minute, to collect that data, to give them the proper information to tell these lines apart? Are you telling me they can't do that over 4 years? Not only this, right here, in the direction that the airstrikes came from, are hills. So there's hills that separated ISIS and the SAA. So it's not like it was intermingled within the city, in the area that the airstrike took place, with at least 4 separate aircraft taking part in this, with drones being spotted over the area the days before, during, and after the attacks. So if you look here, this is the area that was attacked, and these hills that were separating the ISIS-controlled regions from the direction that the airstrikes came from. And following the airstrike, within an hour, ISIS launched an offensive and temporarily captured that attacked region. So that leads to one to believe that coordination was made. To say that they prepared a full-fledged offensive in under an hour is highly unlikely. Anyhow, this is the Argus system. This is what we know about. This is just what they've revealed to us in the past few years. You could assume it could be years more advanced, because even this they were very secretive about. But this is some of the technology that they have at their hand right now.
This image was taken 17,500 feet above Quantico, Virginia, and covers 15 square miles.
This whole image is at a very, very fine resolution. So if we wanted to know what is going on in any spot along this image, say near this building at this intersection, we can generate a moving image that shows what's going on in the area.
Simply by touching the screen, Antoniades has opened up a window showing a detailed area, while still maintaining the broader context.
And everything that is a moving object is being automatically tracked. The color boxes represent that the computer has recognized the moving objects. You can see individuals crossing the street. You can see individuals walking in parking lots. There's actually enough resolution to be able to see the people waving their arms or walking around, what kind of clothes they wear. And you could pick the location of where you produce these images anywhere in the entire field of view.
Antoniades can open up to 65 windows at once and can see objects as small as 6 inches on the ground.
From even 17,500 feet, the white thing that you see flying around is a bird.
They can see objects as small as 6 inches on the ground. So moving back onto the statement as we rightly rip it to shreds. So back to where we were. Targeters believed they were directing attacks on Islamic State fighters, and because this was an honest mistake, the strikes did not violate the international law of armed conflict, U.S. military investigators concluded. It was an honest mistake. They thought it was ISIS. Okay, moving all of that away. Just assuming it was ISIS, okay? It's still illegal. It's illegal for the U.S. to be attacking a sovereign nation, period. It is illegal for the U.S. to be in this sovereign nation. It is illegal for the U.S. to carry out any forms of attacks within a sovereign nation. You know why? Because of this little thing called UN Charter. Yes. According to Article 2, Section 4. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. So within their own guidelines that they've set for themselves, they're still breaking the law. Now I know some people might say, well, this resolution was drafted after that fact to allow countries to attack imminent threats. No. This is excuses given to cover up crimes, even within their own guidelines that they set for themselves. I mean, we don't allow mass murderers to write exceptions in the laws. It's just not how laws work. And you might say, well, Russia has civilian casualties. Even if the vast majority of those false claims are true, even if every single one is true, even if the ones regarding Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian government is true, it's still falling in line with UN regulation. It is still within their legal rights. For one, Russia was invited, Iran was invited, China was invited, and now Egypt has been invited. You know who wasn't invited? The United States, and any of the coalition, and Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, and Israel. None of these people were invited, so they are breaking Article 2, Section 4 of the UN Charter. It's as simple as that. So when they carry out these attacks, and especially when they kill innocent individuals or unpermitted targets, it is a war crime, and it should be prosecuted justly, and it shouldn't be up to the United States to decide its own guilt. Again, bringing it back to murders. Do you allow the murderer to decide if he was guilty or not? No. Because that's not how law works. And it's not just like these are the only attacks. No, even according to the highly Western biased Amnesty International, U.S. coalition forces carrying out airstrikes in Syria must conduct thorough investigations into reports of civilian casualties from its operations and disclose their findings. 11 coalition attacks examined by the organization appear to have killed some 300 civilians during 2 years of strikes targeting armed groups calling itself the Islamic State. So even according to Amnesty International, the United States is committing war crimes. Yes. So bringing it back to this statement that we can barely get through because it's filled with so much hypocrisy. Multiple opportunities to avoid the mistake were missed in a sequence of events that began with the erroneous identification of a vehicle as belonging to ISIS and ended when the Russian military officer called a U.S.-Russia telephone hotline to alert the Americans that the coalition strikes near Deir were hitting Syrian government forces. Again, bringing it back to the surveillance. If you've been watching this area over the past 4 years, how can the presence of one vehicle set off a chain of events of 30 airstrikes by 4 different groups? It's not like that kind of offense can just happen on the minute's notice. It's one vehicle. This was a pre-planned offensive that was cut short and didn't even get to its full potential, and there was already 30 strikes with 4 different aircraft, which requires a lot of coordination. It's not just like a, oops, we slipped up and made one little oopsie. It's not like that at all. Now getting back to this. The call prompted the Americans to halt the attacks, but the chief U.S. investigator told reporters at the Pentagon that if word from the Russians had not been delayed 27 minutes, nearly half of the 30-plus strikes, so even according to their own admittance, half of the 30-plus strikes might not have been conducted. How can you sit there and say that shit? How can you sit there and blame the Russians? Even if that statement is true, which we will never know because you did your own investigation. How do we not know that the Russians weren't calling you for 27 minutes and your ass just kept declining the calls because you didn't want to acknowledge it before you carried out your strikes so ISIS could advance and take land? How do we not know that? Help me understand, because from where it stands right now, anyone with a half a brain is seeing you as a criminal, and justly so. The Russian caller waited that long for a familiar U.S. counterpart to come on the line before passing his message, investigators say. So the way you're trying to frame this is that big bad evil Russia, who wants to help big bad evil Assad kill all his people and continue a reign of terror, wanted you to attack Assad. They wanted you to continue on these strikes. So you're saying, oh, they waited. Well, if they wouldn't have waited, our 30-plus strikes wouldn't have hurt anybody. It's their fault for waiting. No. That makes absolutely no sense. Again, you were saying Russia wanted it to happen? Correct me if I'm wrong, but that makes no fucking sense. Okay, going back to your statement here. This is unfortunate. No fucking shit, it was very unfortunate. The investigators wrote in an executive summary referring to the 27-minute delay. Yeah, it sounds more convenient than unfortunate. But it could have been even more so had the Russians not called. Again, you're trying to make it sound like they wanted it to happen. They also said that notifying Russian officers in advance of the attack, the U.S.-led Air Operations Center inadvertently provided erroneous information about the target location. So, you're saying that you didn't collect your own intel there? The way you make it sound is like, well, Russia gave us faulty intel, so that's why our mistake was, that's why we killed them. So again, you're double speaking of yourself. At first you're saying, well, it's because this one ISIS truck showed up and that prompted us to attack, thinking it was ISIS because of this one truck that showed up in a location that has been under SAA control for 4 years, which is separated by 2 hills with very clear battle lines drawn for a long time. And that information was given to you from Russia? It was Russia's erroneous data? Or this caused the data to become erroneous some kind of a way? You sound like you're making shit up. That's what it sounds like. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. Please provide us with some better information. But it sounds like complete crap. This may have affected the Russian response to the notification and caused considerable confusion in targeting process, the reporter said. A request for comment by the Russian embassy in Washington was not immediately answered. So what does immediately mean? That means 1 minute? 1 hour? Because they gave you a fucking response within 30 minutes saying you supported ISIS, because there's very little room for people to see this any other way. You can see where we're at a loss here. You can see where the concern is coming from. Again, this is an open invitation for you to come and clear this up. It was the first known American attack on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces. Now, there was actually several quote-unquote mistakes by coalition forces on the SAA, but we'll get into that in a later date. Although the Obama administration has called Assad's rule illegitimate, it has focused its military campaign in Syria of forces of the Islamic State group. And what has it done? These supposed attacks that they've done on the Islamic State has only grown their territory up until the point where Russia stepped in back in 2015. It was continuing to grow up until that point. So that tells us something. That makes it look like you weren't trying very hard, or you're not very good at your job, or the latter, you're actually supporting ISIS. You see where we start getting these theories. The Syrian government said immediately after the attacks that the US-led coalition was guilty of serious and blatant attack on Syria and its military. Well, you can see why they were saying such a thing. and it has showed that the US supports the Islamic State because the assault enabled ISIS fighters to make important advances on the battlefield. The Russian government, which supports Assad, made a similar statement, and rightly so. The US denies coalition with ISIS. The investigation report released by the U.S. Central Command said the targeting errors stemmed from a reasonable interpretation of information available at the time. Yeah, well, show us something instead of being so damn secretive, because you're not helping yourself if you think you had some data, because this is an extraordinary claim. This is war crimes we're not talking about Dick Cheney hunting accident kind of mistake. We're talking about World War III causing mistakes. Give us some evidence. You're playing with the lives of billions of people. It's not a joke. Ultimately, we made an unintentional, regrettable error primarily based on human factors in several areas in the targeting process, said Air Force Brigadier General Richard Coe, the chief investigator. So you're letting somebody that was likely in charge of the fucking operation do the investigation on himself. This is unbelievable ignorance and hypocrisy. Coe said it was not possible to know for sure who was killed in these strikes, but they were more than likely forces aligned with the Syrian government. He said it could not be determined with certainty that they were Syrian soldiers, in part because they were not wearing recognizable uniforms. Again, we know from just the Argus video that I showed earlier that they can tell the uniforms apart. The investigation report, which was released in an abbreviated form after Coe spoke, said the targeted individuals wore a mix of traditional wear, civilian attire, and military-style clothing that lacked uniformity. So you're saying that it could have been civilians. Is that what you're saying? You said this could have been an intermingling of civilians and military. So again, you're making yourself look like a complete fucking idiot. Coe said investigators confirmed 15 deaths, but believe there were more. He said outside observers say there were more than 80 people dead. And there was more than 80 people. I believe it was 83, and at least 100 more were injured. They asked whether the Obama administration intended to apologize to Syria. Pentagon Press Secretary Peter Cook said that if Syrian government troops were killed, the U.S. regrets that. But he stopped short of offering an apology. Yeah, because you know you're guilty of these crimes. Moving on. Among the most striking examples of a missed opportunity to halt the attacks before they began was a statement attributed to an intelligence analyst reviewing video surveillance of the vehicle that was being tracked near Deir ez-Zor. Others involved in monitoring the scene had already concluded that it was an ISIS vehicle based on the appearances of the occupants. So again, they're saying that they had video surveillance of it, and we know the capabilities of it. Coe quoted that the unidentified intelligence analyst as saying prior to the decision to the attack, "What we're looking at can't possibly be ISIL." So an intelligence officer told them that it cannot possibly be ISIS. Someone within there had a brain and said, this can't be ISIS. Maybe if we attack them, they could start World War III. So in their own admittance, somebody proposed that it cannot be ISIS. At the time, Coe said, the analyst was not pushed to a larger group or to the final decision makers. But again, this is them admitting that someone within the operation itself said it is not ISIS. So they acknowledge in their brain that this could not be ISIS. So the fact that there was a concern there that it may or may not be ISIS never occurred to them before they launched an attack with 4 aircraft, making 30 strikes, killing 80 plus people and injuring hundreds more, and only stopped after supposedly a delayed for 27 minutes by the Russians for no reason whatsoever, with some of their analysts saying, hey, this might not be an attack. They decided to go with it anyway. That is enough incompetence right there to put people in fucking jail, even with their own admittance. Give us a fucking bone here. This is absolutely astonishing hypocrisy. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Moving on. When the vehicle reached a group of other fighters in the area, and it was treated as friendly, the coalition analyst watching the events for many hours concluded that all present must be Islamic State fighters. So this truck with a guy in it that it could be ISIS because of the way he looks. Just one truck supposedly drove up to SAE controlled territory and was let in. That you said was mixed between civilian and military clothing. That had been there for 4 years and the lines were clearly drawn. So you're saying that SAE forces allowed in this ISIS vehicle that they've been surrounded by for years. They let it in. So you're trying to say that they're in cooperation with ISIS now. And with all the present concerns, you still went ahead with it. That's your justification. Okay, thank you for explaining that. The coalition analysts watching the events for many hours concluded that all the dissenting analysts' opinion that the vehicle was a tank and therefore unlikely to be part of the ISIS force. Okay. If it's a tank, how can you tell what the occupant looks like? I don't know, maybe they saw him get in or what, but first off, it's a tank. So you're saying that the occupant, you didn't say that the vehicle looked like an ISIS vehicle. You said the occupant looked like an ISIS fighter within the tank. But you had already confirmed that the occupants back at this base had mixed uniforms. And you know that this has been SAE for over 4 years. So that this person that was in a tank looked enough like ISIS that it warranted a full-blown scale attack. Okay, thanks for clearing that up. Other analysts, however, noted that ISIS had recently commandeered a Syrian army tank. So they dismissed the dissenters' conclusion. Okay, that's a tank. Wouldn't you think that all the other tanks in the air, because it wasn't just one tank. There were several pieces of artillery and tank and other military vehicles that were taken out and specifically targeted. And according to eyewitnesses, said that they were specifically targeting these pieces of equipment. So if ISIS commandeered a tank, what makes you think that all of those tanks had been commandeered when you're watching it with heavy fucking surveillance? Again, it makes no sense. Please, help me. So finishing this up here. The attack went ahead. A total of 34 precision-guided munitions that were fired from a variety of warplanes, plus 380 rounds of 30mm ammunition, Coe said. The US, Australia, Denmark, and Britain participated in the attacks, and all 4 countries had a hand in investigation led by Coe. So all 4 proprietors got to do their own investigation. That's good to know. And what is this with all these countries being involved in this? Something that you were so uncertain about that your own analyst crew wasn't for sure if this was even ISIS or not, neglecting the obvious facts just according to your own admission. Well, let's bring in all of our friends that we know it's a lot more complicated to carry out attacks with all different speaking languages, and let's make it as complex as possible to carry out this attack that we are not completely 100% certain on. Let's make it as much complex as possible. At some point, negligence has to come in as a factor. Am I crazy? Or are they crazy? Are these people crazy? Just go look up all these operations where it involves several countries, and they'll tell you just how difficult it is carrying out multiple countries. And the reason that they're even saying this most likely is because, oh, well, we had all these other people taking part, so that's why the confusion got so bad. Well, you had the opportunity to eliminate that from even carrying out in the first place, according to your own admission. So why make this as complicated as possible to make the possibility of unnecessary civilian and or wrongly hitting a group that could cause World War III? Please explain me the thought processes of these people and prove to me that this wasn't intent and it wasn't cooperation with ISIS. Come forward with some proper evidence that you get to carry out your own, you get to set your own investigation, and you still can't give us any more than this. This is bad. This looks real bad. This is literally enough justification for Russia, Iran, or Syria to declare war on us. That's enough justification. If we were in the opposite side of this, if we were in the place of Syria, just the fact that their aircraft being present and carrying strikes against us would be enough for us to declare war. And we probably would. In fact, I'm 100% sure we would. We would smash the nuke buttons as hard as we could. But the tables are turned, and you're trying to make excuses for illegal actions that benefit you and nobody else. It doesn't benefit us. It doesn't benefit the Syrians. It doesn't benefit the Russians, Iranians. It doesn't benefit anyone in this factor. It only benefits you, the criminal. So reading the last sentence here. U.S. Central Command released only 4 pages of the investigation report, and those were heavily censored. So, the investigation that you carried out on yourself for actions that you carried out, you're not releasing that information that you shouldn't be carrying out and having in the first place. And lest we forget that the U.S. State Department still has not either made or released an official press conference, as they do almost daily, regarding the September 17th attack. Look, the entire week is missing. From the 17th onwards, September 17th, it's missing. I wonder why it's missing. No other places are missing here, but this entire week is missing. I think maybe the 18th, 19th, 20th, somewhere in there they would at least step out and say, well, this was a mistake. No, they don't. Secrecy, rule by secrecy. So trust us. We know that what we did was not bad because we looked at it and said it's not bad. But don't worry, you don't have to see all of it. Here's some of it, but you don't have to see the rest of it because, trust us, we know we're not bad because we looked at it and saw that we weren't bad. This is an complete assault on our intelligence. This is a complete assault on all rational thinking and the process of law. This should not be going on. This makes me lose faith in humanity to some extent. This is... I think I've said my piece, okay? And I'm just going to follow it up with some statements from Assad's political and media advisor because I think they're rather important. And I know this is a really long video, but I think it was granted and it needed to happen. Please share it and get it out everywhere. But we're going to follow it up here with this video. Over and out, guys.
The ongoing conflict in Syria. In just the past 24 to 36 hours, we've had a bombing and the killing of 62 Syrian army personnel. This done by that of the American military. Bringing in Dr. Butaina Sha'ban, now political and media advisor to the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Thank you very much for joining us on RT International today. You may have just heard me referring to this American bombing campaign in Deir ez-Zor, killing 62 members of the Syrian military. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, says Russia is behaving in a cynical and hypocritical manner for calling an emergency UN Security Council meeting. Is Russia being cynical and hypocritical?
I think what Washington did and what the United States did in Deir ez-Zor is really disgraceful because it was these men from the Syrian Arab army who were fighting Daesh and who were keeping over 300,000 civilians safe from Daesh and from the terrorists in Daesh. And I listened to what Samantha Powell says. I think she should think that what is happening in Syria is very, very different from what she thinks. And I think she should at least have the humility to think of the people and who lost their lives, and at least the honesty that if they are fighting terrorism, they should be absolutely ashamed of what happened in Deir ez-Zor.
Now, Dr. Sha'ban, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, is calling it an honest mistake. Your thoughts?
I think, it would be very strange if a country like the United States of America, who is supposed to be #1 in military power in the world, to make such a mistake, to kill tens of people in a mistake. And the other thing is that I don't know whether your honorable viewers know the scene. The Syrian army was over a few hills, and the American strike with more than one plane came over all these hills. And the moment the American planes struck the Syrian army, the terrorists came from the same side that the Americans struck and occupied the place what the Syrian army was in. So there was obvious to anyone in the field that there is an absolute coordination between the planes, the American planes who shelled the Syrian army, and between the terrorists who came in the place of the Syrian army.
All right, Dr. Sha'aban, if I can just jump in here quickly, because I just want to shed some more light on the information that you're giving us here on RT International. The 4 American warplanes, they flew in from Iraq. They conducted 4 bombing campaigns during which Russian military officials are saying, stop doing this, you're bombing civilians. And when the American warplanes turned to leave, ISIL, terrorists, paid mercenaries, whatever you want to call them, made an immediate offensive move. And you're saying that's a clear case of coordination between the Pentagon and the militants.
Well, I'm saying to you what our army officers saw. Why, when Daesh occupied the field where the Syrian soldiers were, why did the American planes stop shelling Daesh? This is the question. Why didn't they continue shelling Daesh? They only shelled the Syrian Arab army and the soldiers, and when the terrorists occupied the field, they stopped shelling. If there is more than one authority in the United States, I don't know. Our impression was that the White House was embarrassed, but the Pentagon wasn't. I don't know.
Dr. Sha'aban, if I can just jump in quickly, because I've got such little time and I must ask you more questions. Forgive me for jumping in, please. This shaky ceasefire, the truce that is supposed to be in effect, the Russian army keeps saying every time there's a ceasefire in Syria, it only serves jihadists or militants to regroup and rearm. Do you agree?
That's true, that the terrorists regroup and they rearm with every truce and with every cancellation of hostilities, unfortunately. And that's because the United States is hesitant to strike at the terrorists in Syria.
Dr. Sha'aban, another question for you, please. Here on RT International a few days ago, we were showing footage of American commandos fleeing a Syrian city, essentially being thrown out by rebels who are backed by the Pentagon. The rebels were calling the American commandos infidels and pigs and to get out of Syria. If that's the case, why would American-backed rebels be turning against America?
Those rebels who stood against America are different from Daesh, who is in Deir. There are many people in the field in Syria. The nationalistic people, the real Syrian people are the ones who would not accept the occupation from any country. So the fact that there are some rebels who kicked the American forces out doesn't mean that the United States does not coordinate with others in other fields, in other places.
All right, well, and one more question for you before I let you go, Dr. Sha'aban. There was an interesting news article on the website inspiretochangeworld.com by a German news outlet that actually said the war in Syria has nothing to do with terrorism. It's about energy. It's about the future of gas pipelines. And the author also said that main flashpoints in Syria happen where pipelines are or where pipelines will be, and the flashpoint of Aleppo is the last city in Syria where the country's main pipeline goes through. Your thoughts on that?
I read that article that you referred to, and that happened, he said, since 2009, when they wanted the Qatari line to come through Syria into Turkey and Europe, and the Syrian president wanted the Russian line to come, and I think this is probably one of the reasons. One thing for sure is all the war on Syria has nothing to do with freedom or human rights or the interest of the Syrian people. It is absolutely against the interest of the Syrian people, and it's only Russia and Iran who are standing solidly with the Syrian army against terrorists, while the coalition led by the United States did not strike at terrorists and at their convoy and at their bases in Syria.
Dr. Butain Sha'aban, a political and media advisor to the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.